I think we're live, Todd.
I think we're live. I'm watching the participants coming in at the bottom, so we'll hold out for just a couple of seconds here while everyone's video and audio connects. We're expecting a large number today.
Todd, what's great about your life today?
What's great about my life today? Well, the sun's out today. I got some sun, and I'm fortunate enough to be even though we're at home. I have a south-facing window,
Mm,
which means that I kind of roast in the afternoons, but there's a little bit of basking too.
that's lovely. What about you, Ted? What's great about your life today?
Well, I mean, it's a beautiful fall day. The foliage is beginning to peak, and went out for a long walk earlier this morning, and the weather is fantastic. It's in the upper 70s, maybe even 80 today. So it's just a glorious North Carolina fall day.
I love it. I love it.
How about you?
I'm what am I celebrating? I the Dodgers are in the World Series, which is kind of fun locally. Folks are kind of excited about that. And I'm doing, it's busy right now. Like I feel busy as a counselor, but I'm grateful for great stories. I feel like I've been reading a lot lately that I'm just really excited about. I love getting to glimpse into these little worlds, and I've glimpsed into like four different worlds this morning, and I've just really enjoyed that. So
Stories have been meaningful during this time. I feel fortunate to be in a business like book publishing where people need books now more than ever. Uh, so I tell folks that I grew up in a house. My dad was Hershey chocolate salesman for 25, 30 years. We were big in at Halloween. That my house was big, but it didn't matter what was happening with the economy, recession, whatever was going on. People wanted their chocolate, and it was good. And books and stories, same
and
kind of way.
chocolate.
And chocolate, they can go. So I'm seeing our participants still there are still folks joining us, but it seems to have kind of leveled out a little bit. So we'll go ahead and get underway. My name is Todd Stockey. I am Senior Vice President and Editorial Director at Sourcebooks. We are a book publisher headquartered in lovely Naperville, Illinois, and we are joined today by one of my favorite areas of publishing, authors within our college reference list. Um, and I want to give you a quick overview of what we're going to be doing in the webinar here today. Um, we're going to start off with a conversation about college search and admission, and of course the pandemic in the room is the pandemic, and we're going to talk to we will talk to Edward Fiske here, the creator of the legendary college guide that bears his name, the Fiske Guide to Colleges, and several other books in the college reference arena and in the education arena. And Ethan Sawyer, better known as the college essay guy. And then later in the hour, we're going to hear about how college life has been impacted by COVID from Harlan Cohen, the author of the New York Times bestselling uh, college guide, The Naked Roommate. And you'll get a sneak peek at his new book that's coming in a couple of months as well. We'll be taking your questions live today. Please submit those in the Q&A section rather than the chat, please. So you should see a Q&A section specifically. And we'll be moderating that, and we'll have some segments on that. And then a reminder that everyone who registered will receive a digital copy of Harlan's new book, and will be entered to win a college Sourcebooks college prize pack at the end. The winner is going to be announced at the end of the webinar. So we'll do that then. So without any further ado, let's dive in. I have my friend Ted Fiske here, and Ethan Sawyer here. Ted Fiske is the former education editor at the New York Times, and many years ago brought forth the Fiske Guide to Colleges. My publishing company, Sourcebooks, has been privileged to be publishing the Fiske Guide for about 20 years now, almost exactly 20 years
Yeah,
now,
just about 20 years. Yeah.
which is remarkable, and like I said, a real blessing that we've been able to do that for so long. I think I'll if I paraphrase and speak on behalf of Ted, the Fiske Guide is in many ways intended to be an extension of the counselor's voice for parents and students, and we know it's a big asset for guidance counselors around the country and in fact around the world. So welcome, Ted. And then Ethan Sawyer is best known, I guess, as the college essay guy. I got to tell you, so I've been publishing college reference books for 20 years, as was mentioned before. So over the years, I have seen pretty much every college essay book proposal that has been written. They hit my desk at some point, and I've seen them again and again and again. We published a wonderful one with Ted some years back, Fiske Real College Essays That Work, and Ethan's project came across and was genuinely the first time that I was wowed by a college essays book. Genuinely saying something and doing something different on behalf of students, and has some real easy entry points. He's also just released college essay or college admissions essentials, that covers more broadly the admissions experience. So let's go ahead and dive into the two of you. Interested right from the start. Let's just get into the COVID pandemic. Maybe you can give us maybe Ethan, you can start for us. What are you seeing and hearing about how this is impacting the admissions process?
Yeah, sure. So on a one-to-one level, like as I meet with students, it seems like, first of all, I think that the Common App has done a pretty good job of giving a space for students to talk about the COVID pandemic and how that's impacted them. And I'll say more about that in a little bit. But my sense is that just overall, and I'm speaking to counselors now, so you've seen this too, like kids are stressed and they've got a lot going on. And I'm finding that students are, it's just, things are harder. That's been my experience. And a couple schools, but not a ton, have extended their, early action, early deadlines, which has been early decision deadlines, which has been nice. But what I wanted to share just briefly, some resources for COVID related stuff. And then I want to get your thoughts, Ted, on some, I'll just paste it into the chat box and then I'll share my screen real quick. Some resources that we put together for just, and these might be resources that y'all are familiar with, but maybe not all of them. So, some of the things like NACAC put together this really cool college admission status update tool that's searchable. I'm, a resource guy, as is Ted. So, students can basically go into this tool and they can type in the name of the school and learn, what's the latest with a particular school. So that one has been useful for looking at specifics. I think that one's especially going to be useful next year when students are trying to figure out their college plans. Here's, one of the other things that's been tricky is researching the school without being able to visit. And so here's a resource on how to research colleges without visiting campus. And that one's got, 8 or 10 different things that students can do. I won't get into the details of it just yet. There's this wonderful one that folks, if they're in the Facebook college admissions group, have seen this one. Rebecca Chabra put this one together that has just a ton of college virtual tours. So I'd strongly recommend this one. It's basically a spreadsheet that students can kind of look through and figure out, okay, how do I quickly find out about a bunch of different schools? And what are the different online resources that they use, to let students get to know the campus even better. For students who are working, or for counselors who are working with students who are doing fly-in programs, who are interested in those, I know that that's maybe some of those are, more recent, or a couple months ago maybe, but there are some schools that are still doing fly-in programs, and College Greenlight, shout out, is always so awesome about helping, students find out about what those fly-in programs are. So I encourage folks to share those with students. And then there's, of course, we know if you're a counselor, you've heard lots and lots of talk about testing. Fair Test, as ever, has their awesome list of test optional schools, test blind schools. That's kind of a moving target, as we know. I'd love to kick it to you for a minute, Ted. What is your take, or what is your sense in terms of, broadly speaking, standardized testing in a COVID-19 world.
Yeah, well, thanks, Ethan. Yeah, you're right. I mean, the COVID has played havoc with all aspects of college admissions, but no more so than in the area of the SAT tests. Thousands of test sites have closed, which means that hundreds of thousands of applicants have simply been unable to access the tests and submit scores. And so as a result, schools that normally required SAT and ACTs to be submitted are waiving their testing requirements. And in California, the courts have even banned public universities from even using, much less requiring, SAT and ACT. So with a smaller proportion of applicants barred from being able to submit test scores, the usefulness to colleges of test scores has been diminished. I think I've heard the University of Chicago estimates that only about half of applicants will even be submitting scores this year. And this also affects particular aspects of the testing, like the super scores, which gives you a chance to take the highest score you get on various administrations of the test. And on the negative side, it sort of limits the usefulness of tests for colleges being able to find the so-called diamonds in the rough, students who they might like, but whose abilities aren't necessarily evident for other reasons. On the other hand, it's also going to diminish the advantage that well-to-do students have because of access to high quality test prep. Yeah. So the overall bottom line would be that COVID has reduced the importance of test scores in the whole process, at least temporarily. So there's a result is it's also these trends and the impact of COVID has really magnified other recent trends already underway in testing. There's been a substantial increase, as just mentioned, and Fair Test is documented in the number of test optional and test blind colleges. It's over 1,500 colleges, according to Fair Test. It's about 2/3 of the sort of baccalaureate granting degrees are now test optional. But also, and perhaps more important, colleges have become increasingly skeptical, independent of COVID, about the usefulness of test scores. And increasingly, the emphasis is on the school transcript, the combination of what your grades are and then the rigor of your curriculum. So what does this mean for applicants? The Fiske Guide has always printed the middle ranges of test scores, the 25th to the 75th percentile. The rationale being that this is a way to help students gauge, one, the chances of admission to a particular school, but also where they're likely to fit in academically into the academic environment in that school. But now, with much smaller proportions of students submitting scores, the validity and hence the usefulness of looking for these score ranges has sort of tanked. So as a result, in the Fiske Guide, starting with this edition, because we really only want to deal with what we consider to be reliable and accurate information, we're going to suspend the reporting of SAT and ACT ranges, at least for the foreseeable future. Now, of course, these scores, for anybody who wants them, are readily available. Just go to a college website or the Common Data Set or College Navigator. So they're there. But the obvious message then would be to students, the bottom line of all this would be, first, focus on building up your transcript. Don't even think about using your test scores as a way to make up for your mediocre grades. And then also pay more attention, and Ethan was a big help in all of this, of course, is paying attention to the essay and to recommendations. So bottom line, less importance in the process for test scores.
Well,
I was going to say, Bob Schaefer just slipped us a note in the chat saying that the current number is more than 1,635 four-year schools are test optional or test blind. for fall 2021. That's 70%, more than 70% of all accredited colleges and universities. And among quote unquote top tier schools, 98 of the US News top 100 national universities are also and of those, I got it now, 98 of the 100 quote unquote top universities.
About 20 years ago, I gave up trying to keep up with Bob Schaefer's statistics.
The exceptions are University of Florida and Florida State, which still require them. And the same is true for 96 of the top 100 LACs. So
we had a question in the Q&A on this subject. How would you advise a student on whether to submit scores or not if they're optional? Is it based on prior schools, averages, etc.?
What is your sense, Ted?
I don't think anything has changed. You might as well, I suppose, if you've taken them, but don't sweat it if you don't have it, because you've got lots of company.
Yeah, I like that answer. I'm curious, Ted, in terms of advice as students are putting together their lists, what would you say in this sort of in the pandemic world, what's changed, and what would you, even in terms
I would say that basically the fundamentals of this question is how you develop a list are pretty much what they've always been. Obvious thing, you need a mix of reaches, of likely acceptances, and some safety schools. The most important message there is make sure you're careful about what your safety school is, because you may end up there. So that's perhaps what people sometimes forget. They don't just throw it in because you need the name of a school. The Fiske guy, I guess my core advice in thinking about this would be focus on the cultures and the institutional personality of the school, because American colleges and universities are very different. They have very different and distinctive cultures, even schools that look a lot at first glance like each other. So the thing to do is to try to understand the culture and the institutional personality of the schools, and then see, is this going to match with your own particular needs and personality and goals? And this is what we try to do in the Fiske Guide, and the narrative format that we have, the little mini essays about school, aims at doing just this. And institutional cultures may evolve, but they do so slowly. And it's hard to sort of discern in the midst of all the current chaos and the need for virtual tours and so it's a little hard to discern what these institutional cultures are and the personalities of the schools, because they're as different from each other as the applicants are. So, but I think what we try to do in the Fiske Guide is to capture these institutional personalities. I mean, we keep up with statistics and do dorms and that sort of thing. But I think given all the chaos around here, we sort of have to make a leap of faith that the traditional cultures of these schools are eventually going to reassert themselves. It may be your sophomore year or your junior year or whatever, but the tenacity of the traditions is really pretty strong. And so one of the risks in the next edition of the Fiske Guide is going to have a lot of observations about campus cultures, which are obviously not relevant at the moment because of number of students not on campus and so forth. But once we return to whatever the new normal is, you have to have some faith that the schools are going to be more or less the same, and at least the culture of the school is going to be more the same. So I think you can, that is something to grab a hold of. And I would say, sort of like looking for fundamentals in the stock market, I would just sort of emphasize, keep your eye on this, on these cultures, and then try to build a list of schools where you think you're going to fit in for these.
Mm-hmm. One thing that I want to touch on briefly is this section that's been allotted to students in the Common App for the 250 word, hey, if you've got something to write about, something that the way that COVID impacted you, here's how to write about it. So I'm going to share my screen again real quick. If you Google COVID college essay guy, which it sounds like a weird curse that I'm putting on myself, you'll find this. But a quick guide to this, how to write about coronavirus using this special 250 word section. And if you're a counselor, you already know about this section, but I just advise students to go straight forward with this. Challenges faced and what were the impacts on me. I think the impacts on the student is especially important, right? Because the challenges faced is, okay, my so-and-so in my family had coronavirus, but what impact did that have on you? And then I think allowing space for what I did about it and what I learned through the experience. I think that as I've been reading some students' drafts, they'll focus mostly on the challenges and they'll kind of leave it there. And I found that I've really been hungry to know about, well, what did you do about it? What did you learn through it? And so I gave some examples here from students, living in rural North Carolina, I have limited access to high-speed internet, and my family, we had to share laptops. So I communicated these problems to my family so we could work together. We organized a schedule. I'm proud to say that we made the best out of a difficult situation. Now that might sound a little bit general, so getting specific would be nice. And if students didn't face challenges, what I advise is students picking what are a couple different values that you focused on. So maybe you focused on your health. Maybe you focused on, connection with your family. Maybe there was some opportunity that came up and some students start a new project and it helps them express their creativity. So focusing on, 2 or 3 values and what were those values that you could, highlight. And I've got, some examples here. If students want to get creative, I don't want them to obsess about this, like, oh, this is another essay I need to write. If they want to get creative, they could do a little simple hook here. Jose, turn down the TV. Mom, the stove won't turn on. Be quiet. I'm on a call, Zuli. Have you seen the scissors anywhere? Right? And there's a simple short hook, but then boom, get into the factual. Life in quarantine was actually 4 lives squished together. Tell us what happened, what you did about it, and what you learned. So anyway, I'll post that link in the chat box as well if folks want that. I want to respond to this one question that popped into the chat box that I think just came to the panelists. And I want to agree with you, Debbie. This is back to testing for a minute. We can see how much time we want to spend on this before, and I'll let Todd, you let us know when we're up on our time. But Debbie says it's confusing because some schools say they can't unsee in terms of tests that are reported what they see. So they caution that students shouldn't send scores unless they're really happy with them. And I think part of what we can do as counselors is, I think part of our job is like, how do we inform students and give them, enough information to make an informed decision? We'll put it that way. And that's right. It is confusing, right, in this situation. So I think that when I'm answering a student's question on should I submit X test score or not, I think that there are situations where it will most certainly help them. There will situations where it may help them. There are situations where it isn't likely to help or hurt them because it's kind of right in the middle. And this is obviously school dependent and in some cases student dependent. There are situations where it may hurt them. And then there are students where it is likely to, impact their chances in a negative way. And so I kind of will try and let students be aware of that sort of spectrum of possibilities and say, my sense is it's a score that may hurt you, or, what, I think it's kind of in the middle. And then I always, I often say, it's up to you, you make the call, because I really want the student to make the call. Here's my sense based on what I've seen for this school. And I think that's about all we can do. I know it's stressful because there's no right? It's not like definitely should or definitely shouldn't, but to Ted's point, I think that if students don't do it, I think it matters a little bit less this year. I'm trying to be really qualified in my answer.
And I think colleges are going to be pretty tolerant about these sorts of problems that students are dealing with. And so they're not going to hold mistakes against students as much as they would before.
That's my hope. That's my hope. We'll see how it goes.
Colleges are busy making their own mistakes.
Sure.
We've kind of segged our way into we've been in Q&A for a little bit here, folks. Just so you know, we're taking things from chat and from the Q&A. So I want to get into some of the questions that are in the Q&A section here. This one from Linda, who says, without using grades or test scores, how should students determine which schools would be likely or which schools would be reaches?
I think it's still good to use grades and test scores, right? I think that's still a good thing. I think that it's going to be a little more up in the air and a little more uncertain, but I think still those are a pretty good marker of, which are the reach. Generally, we kind of know which are going to be the reaches for most students, right? But I think that, God, that's a nuanced answer. I think that generally speaking, it's going to be somewhat similar, even though there will be some small things based on, for example, schools that went pass fail last spring, or students that can't test.
Yeah, but the basic principle is the best way to predict how somebody's going to behave in the future is how they behaved in the past in similar situations. So that sort of banal truth just persists, I think. And this is what college, and then even before COVID, colleges were moving toward relatively more emphasis on this because colleges understand some of the silliness of SAT and ACT scores. So
Some
they
nice, oh, sorry, go
go
ahead.
ahead. Go
I was
ahead.
gonna say some nice advice from Shane Brent Maldonado. Best advice I received from University of San Francisco is this: the app is complete without the test scores. The scores for an optional school is additional supplemental info.
Yeah, and the colleges, what they've been moving toward is simply using the SAT scores to confirm the evidence that they're getting from the transcript, the grades and the rigor. They're not using test scores as much in the past as saying this is a definitive criteria. It's more confirmation of other things, and they're looking for any discrepancies between what the test scores and what the other evidence shows. But it's the other evidence that's driving the decision. Now that's a generalization, but
Hopefully. I keep doing this on this session.
So question here from Shannon. It says, I haven't heard admissions folks directly address this, but have you heard, do you think wealthy students, that is full pay students, will have an easier time getting in this year in general?
What's your guess, Ted?
I think one thing that's probably going to be happening, and it's not good, would be that because of all these uncertainties, colleges are going to be more open to students from schools that they know, and they'll just be more secure in judging, as opposed to students who look really good, but they don't really know what the school is and what the context of the student is. And this is not a good development, but I think it's probably a reality.
I think we won't know. I mean, I think that I think it's going to depend on the school, right? There are so many schools that are in the red, right? That are just like struggling. And for those schools that are struggling, I think they're going to be looking for who are our full pay kids, right? I mean, I hope that there are schools and there are admissions officers, maybe even on this call, that are really looking out for those students who can't afford, full freight. But I think it's going to depend on the school. And I think that we all sense that schools are going to be more stressed. They got to keep the lights on too. So.
Yeah. Okay. Question for you here, Ethan. I think this one's up your alley. Someone says, what do you suggest for students like juniors and seniors who are working to make the grade, but still not quite there yet? They might be B students and lower. A lot of emphasis is on achievers, both academically and other, but not all kids have found their passions yet, academically or otherwise.
I mean, I think the question is like, what is, because there's like two possible, so how do we advise them in terms of just their lives? And then how do we advise them on the college process? And I think as a counselor, like we would just say, encouraging them, this is the general answer, to do the things that they care about, to explore things that they care about, and as they're trying to sort of figure out what those things are, two of my favorite resources around that are like Do What You Are, not necessarily the Naviance version, although that's fine, but the book. And then I really love Use Science for helping students try to figure out what are those things that I really care about and areas where not just my interests, but also my aptitudes. I think that's a really great one. And then in terms of advising them on the college list, that there's still going to be great schools out there that are going to love to have them. And so I think just this is a call to help them expand their college list and their sense of what schools are out there that are possible for them. That's maybe kind of a general answer, though. I don't know if you have anything better, Ted.
I think you have to. Most schools are in this country are not all that selective. We can obsess over the super selective schools, but one of the sort of the almost the defining characteristic of American higher education is its diversity. We've got everything from small single-sex colleges out in the boonies to urban universities, some public, some private, world class, and there's niche schools for evangelicals, Jesuit, environmentally oriented schools. I mean, there's this incredible richness of opportunities out there. And this is unlike anywhere else in the world. The American system of higher education has this diversity. So, I mean, there are literally dozens of places that would be a good fit for any particular student. And so take advantage of this. Don't get hung up on just a few schools, because it's important that you get in a place where you're going to develop. It's not just the reputation of the school, but it's what's the place that's going to meet your particular interests and help you grow, and what is going to be nurturing for you. And the opportunities out there are endless.
Mm-hmm. And there are so many schools like that. Scott Atherton in the chat box is pointing out Steve Antonoff's awesome book, which I recommend all the time, The College Finder. And there are a couple of specific lists, like schools for the late bloomer, schools for the B student, that are great. All of his lists are on College Express. That's, again, one of my favorite resources to talk about. And I just posted the link in. But here's a list of just tons of schools. I'm gonna share my screen once more. If you go to College Express, you'll see top colleges for the late bloomer. And it's not just like a couple, like it's bunches and bunches and bunches. And like, you know, how much do you know about Christopher Newport University or, you know, Defiance College, you know? So some of these schools, you know, for counselors, it's just an incredible list. The thing that I love about this resource, especially the online version, is when you click, you know, there's, let me see, list, if you click lists and rankings, you can research schools based on all kinds of different features, but they're not like rated like 1 to 10. It's just sort of like, here's some schools to think about. And then you can click, you know, once you've got a particular school that you're interested in, you know, Alaska hidden gems, Arizona hidden gems, or they've got them sorted by state. You can click on, here are other things that school's known for. So it ends up being a really great research tool for a particular school. So shout out to Steve Antonoff and College Express for putting that together.
So one more question here for this section. It's kind of there's a big picture, broad question here. And I like to poke it in here because I'm curious, because I'm watching my own alma mater struggle with this challenge. But the question is, what are your perspectives on the state of colleges in the next 5 to 10 years? Big, broad question. Do you believe we're moving into a tech skills based college experience, dramatically replacing the traditional college experience?
Ted, I'm bad at these questions. You tell me what you think. What do you tell us? What you think?
I mean, there's certainly a lot of pressure in that direction. But you know, I've got to. My preference, of course, is one thing, and I'm trying to not let that just influence my answer on this. But I still really believe in, even the way that the economy is changing, in the importance of liberal arts and having that basic foundation of learning to think, to put things in perspective, to communicate, to raise questions, to find answers to the questions. Because it's one thing to say, okay, I'm going to aim at getting my first job, but why spend thousands and thousands of dollars and 4 years of your time preparing in a narrow way for what's going to be the worst job you ever have, which is to say your first one. And what you got to do, a better way to invest your time and your funds, of course, families, income and money and so forth. Yeah, it is to think in terms of the long haul. And I know I have a good friend who was in the financial advising business, and he sort of goofed off in college. I think he was an English major or something like that. And he went to apply for a job with a financial services company. And the recruiter looked at him and said, what makes you think that you're prepared to work in this field? You don't have any technical information. He says, well, when I was thinking about this interview, I went and I looked at the background of all your senior executives, your presidents and vice presidents, and most of them had liberal arts degrees. So I figured what's good enough for the president of your company is probably good enough for me. So it's these thinking skills, it's being able to put things in perspective and so forth, that's going to serve you best over the long haul. Now, this isn't to say you can't study something like engineering or computer science or so forth. I mean, there are plenty of colleges, and this may be the dominant a major trend. Colleges are looking for ways to combine the technical with the broader thinking skills. And I would say probably that's the direction that higher education is moving in this at this time. Combination of both. So
Got it. Okay, so I want to move to the next section here. Folks, don't go away. Ted and Ethan are coming back, but we're going to bring in Harlan Cohen here, and here he comes, and there he is. So Harlan Cohen is the New York Times bestselling author of The Naked Roommate, and he, as you can see on his screen here, he did a parents edition as well. That's different from The Naked Roommate, and it happened in my house. It's because The Naked Roommate would be given to the kid, and the parents would steal it. So they'd get it as a graduation gift. The parents would steal it, and so they needed their own book. Ethan has been a friend of mine for 15 or so years now, and we've published multiple books with him, including a new one coming up. But Harlan, if we can dive in here to once again back to the pandemic in the room, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing and seeing about the student experience in times of COVID.
Thanks, Todd. It's great to see everybody. It's great to have you here. And I've got good news. Everything is great. The students are having the best year ever. They're loving it. And while we thought it was going to be hard, I think this is a spectacular year. Isn't it nice to hear that, even though it's not true? I thought I would start on a positive note and create some really great energy, but it's been a real struggle. And my expertise is I help people to get comfortable with the uncomfortable. And what COVID has done is it has popped everybody's comfort bubble. Whatever their community they're from, they're now facing discomfort. And I think what's really interesting, and I was really soaking in what Ethan and Ted were saying, is just how the process of search and selection is already uncomfortable enough. And now what we've seen is so many students practicing discomfort in a way they've never had to practice it before, and so many parents and so many families. So the perspective of the gift is we've all had to face discomfort in a way we haven't wanted to in the past. And of course, some of this discomfort has had tragic results, but for a large number of people, the discomfort has been having to rethink things and to identify what they want and how to navigate that change. So I would love to be able to bring everybody up to speed on just some of the headlines and where I'm finding some of these resources, and then just give you a quick framework of how to navigate this change. And I think that these tools are going to be helpful whether you are someone who works with students in high school, or if you're in a college level, or wherever you are. The framework and also what we're going to share regarding the new book, I think will really have an impact and help you in many ways. The way I present's a little different. If you want to see the full images, just pin my particular frame or do speaker view, and you'll be able to get a sense of everything and see it much more clearly. I'm going to make myself a small person right now and bring you to the Diamondbacks. So this is a story just from today. This is from South Carolina, and there's been a lot of challenges on that campus, and it's been in the news frequently. And today, this is fascinating, Todd. They said they're suspending publishing the newspaper till November. And the reason they're doing this is because the students are so overwhelmed. The first sentence of the story is, "We're not okay. For the next week, they're not going to be producing any content." And this is a school that started in early August. The students have been reporting on this. They've been dealing with the residential challenges. They've been dealing with schools being closed. Carolina has really been, schools in Carolina have really been fascinating. And what's really interesting as well, for anybody who's in the search and selection piece, looking at the college newspaper, looking at the media, seeing how schools have been interacting with students, seeing how students have been navigating these changes, provides wonderful insight that I think also with the Fiske Guide can help reflect the culture of these particular communities. So you can really see, how are students handling this? How are schools handling this? And what opportunities are available? Another great resource, the Chronicle. I don't know how many of you are Chronicle readers, but I start my day off They have a wonderful up-to-date ticker where every day they'll give you the latest stories. In fact, it was the University of South Carolina story that I picked up on and then found the actual source. You can also find really great stories by combing through the past issues as well. Uh, Vox, I don't know if you've seen this story, and we're including all the links as well. Vox has a great profile of how schools have been handling the different COVID testing scenarios, how they've been adjusting from the University of Illinois, doing testing twice a week, to some of the other schools who don't do any testing at all. And it's interesting again to see how they've been treating the students, how they've been working within the residential communities, how they've been dealing with quarantine, how students have been supported emotionally. The mental health issue has been a huge piece. Another jarring part of the story is the uncertainty. For so many students, they don't even know what's going to be happening in the fall, let alone dealing with all of the changes with the application process. It's another story. This one's from USA Today that talks about how schools are changing now as we see the wave of increasing COVID cases. Students who are planning to go to school in the spring, may not be able to go. It's the equity issue has been a huge part too. I do a lot of interviews with students, and the reality that there are students at the last second who weren't able to go to schools that were anticipating going to schools, and they were living in the residence halls, and now they weren't able to get apartments, so they're living at home in those situations where they may not have the best resources. Students have really been thrown more so than ever before. And what's so important, the mental health piece. Spent a lot of time on the mental health piece. This is from the American College Health Association. This is a source that I'll go to frequently, and they do a wonderful survey every year, twice a year. And this one in particular, I've been following. Students reported experiencing the following within the last 12 months. And you see 55.9% of college students feeling hopeless in the past 12 months. This is the 2019 data. And then when you go to 2011, you see that number is 45.2%. So just going back, 55.9% in 2019, and then 45.2% in 2011. When I'm doing events, I'll joke that you guys, when I'm talking to students, you're the most hopeless generation ever. Isn't that exciting? And this was before COVID rocked everybody to the core. Now, why does this happen, and how can we set students up to be successful? That's something that I spend a lot of time doing, and this year has become a really wonderful opportunity. And again, keeping in mind when I say wonderful opportunity and gift, I also appreciate the gravity and the tragedy and the wide spectrum of experiences that people feel. But I like to compare it to that moving walkway in the airport that I don't go to anymore. I remember these things. Remember airports? This idea that everything comes to so many students in so many different directions. But the big shift this year is students really need to be great at answering the question, what do I want? And I know, Ethan, you work really hard and do an amazing job of helping students to answer that question, what do I want? But once they get to college, that's really where I've spent a lot of time seeing that they crumble. And in the Naked Roommate book, we really focus on helping students to get comfortable with these changes, sharing firsthand experiences of students who have been there, so that students who are in this exploration process can find their way. The framework that I share in Naked Roommate is, what do you want? And that could be a really difficult question, and I'll get into that in just a moment. What makes you uncomfortable? Because there's always something uncomfortable if it's big enough and bold enough. And then the third part is people, places, and patience. Who are the people who have been there and done it who can help you? Who are the people you can turn to? Who are the people you want to surround yourself with? Places, where are the places that you're going to sweat, play, pray, live, learn, lead, love, and work? Because that's where you're going to form meaningful relationships. And then patience is the ability to tolerate the discomfort that comes during this process. Now, when you think of COVID and you think of how things have changed, well, students really need to be great, especially during that search and selection process of really identifying where are the places you could do the things you love to do, even if the environment, if the world doesn't cooperate the way you want. Where could you put yourself, and where are students now? Because that may be a preview of what you're dealing with in the fall, so that you can start to think, how can I get what I want? Now, the thing about wanting, it's very scary. And any of you who work with students and you ask them that question, what do you want? You find they've got that blank stare, like, huh? Like, what do you, they don't even know where to begin. Wanting is incredibly scary, and it's incredibly scary for many reasons. The first thing is you won't get it. Now, I've become an expert on rejection. Todd and I know each other real well, and we've had so many. I think 4 books, 5 books, I don't know. And the thing is, sometimes Sourcebooks likes my books, sometimes they don't. Sometimes I get rejected, believe it or not, which is difficult. Finally, we got a new one coming, which I'm so excited about. But the thing is, you might get into the school you want. You might not get into the school you want. You might get in, you might not get in. Talking quickly, I can't remember which one I said. But the thing is, you might not get it. And that can be really hard. And so many students stop taking risks because they're too afraid. I'll give you a quick example. Yesterday, I was doing an event with Ohio State University with RAC, their residential housing group. And I asked one of the students, Carlisle is his name. He's a good guy, a musician, cool guy. And I said, and I always ask permission. I said, are you single? He said, yeah. And I said, are you interested in meeting someone? And he said, not right now. I'm too busy. And I said, really? Like, can we be honest? You're at Ohio State, the Ohio State University. There's like 50,000 people. And the next thing was, he then changed his tune a little bit, because I said, hey, Carlisle, if somebody were to come up to you, who wanted to spend time with you, would you be open to spending time with that person? And all of a sudden, it was safe for him to want. And I said, the thing is, you do want something, you just don't want to get hurt or deal with the disappointment. And that's the grit and resilience piece that we see so frequently. Students will take a risk and they actually might get it, and they might get in. And especially when it comes to college and getting in, it's so exciting. But then they become somebody who depends on a institution or university to then create the experience they want. See, getting it is great, but then you have to keep it. And that's the one of the hardest parts, because once you get it, it's hard to always keep it, because you're going to eventually lose it, because everything in life is temporary. And more so than ever before, we've seen that wanting is so dangerous and wanting is so hard. And I think that what Ethan does by helping students to really be free to want and to really explore what they want, then what Ted has done with the Fiske Guide, capturing the culture so that students can identify the people and the places and the experiences, they're going to know what they want and they're going to be great at getting it. And then once they're there, they're going to be much better equipped to handle all the changes. So the question that I ask students is, what if you believed everything was going to be okay? What if you knew it was going to be okay? I talked to a sophomore who's taken a gap year at a highly selective school, and he was really torn. What should he do this gap year? What experiences should he have? This is his chance to have something of meaning. And I said to him, like, why are the stakes so high, man? Like, what's going to happen? Your only job is to experience something. And it's this fear that it's not going to be okay. The whole college piece is we're afraid it's not going to be okay. But I like to teach from a place of, what if you knew it's going to be okay? And it is going to be okay, because I believe every student has a place where they can find their people and places. And I believe every student can create the dream they want, because they're the dream maker. So this philosophy, this framework of what do I want, what makes me uncomfortable, how do I find the people and places so that I can create a life that I love, the message that we captured in Naked Roommate, well, we've taken the essence of that, the framework, the marrow, and created a new book. It's based on Nelson Mandela's quote, I never lose, I either win or learn, which I believe this is a win or learn year, entirely a win or learn year. And it helps students to reframe risk taking so that when they want something, instead of being so afraid that it's not going to turn out as planned, giving the world permission to not always give them what they want. And I'm going to wrap this up in just a moment, because I know we're getting close to that time. I just wanted to share this one piece because this piece I think is so fundamental, not only to the college search and selection process, but also to leadership, success, grit, resiliency. The universal rejection truth, let me get my head out of the way. It says it's a law of nature like gravity. You know, we can't refute this law of nature. The universal rejection truth says not everyone and everything is always going to respond to me the way I always want. The universal rejection truth of love, the universal rejection truth of academics, I'm not always going to get the A. The universal rejection truth of nature. Nature is not always going to cooperate. And to be able to recognize this truth is so pivotal, especially for those of you who are growth mindset people, because in order to have a growth mindset, in order to be open and willing to grow, you need to know that you could be brilliant, you could be creative, you can be interesting, you can be dynamic, you can be all the things that make you have value, but not always get what you want. So when you know there's a law of the universe at play, it becomes far less personal and it gives you something to work with and somewhere to go. In the book, Win or Learn, The Naked Truth About Turning Every Rejection into Your Ultimate Success, we give people the tools to be able to think freely, to want knowing no matter what, I'm going to be okay. And then to recognize that there's challenges and adversity along the way, and then helping to give them the tools to find their people and places so they can ultimately get where they want to go. I'm really excited about this book. I'm so grateful it's here. I know I was joking with Todd about how, you know, there's other books that we've proposed and it's not always like Sourcebooks goes, yes, Harlan, you can do that. And in fact, I've wanted to write this book for so many years and it's gotten rejected in so many different forms. And it's like,
You're welcome, Harlan. It's been about 10 years we've been talking about writing this book.
It's just the coolest thing because, you know, I live it and experience it. And I'm so grateful to be able to give this to you. And it's a very simple read. You'll see it's quick, it's efficient. It's meant to be read in under a couple hours, hour and a half. And you'll see the framework that is in this, you could apply to really anything where you're looking to help people to take risks and go after what they want. So with that, I want to just mention two things very quickly. Before College TV is another venture that I recently launched. I've been interviewing students on college campuses, underrepresented students, first generation students, working with grant-based programs, Gear Up, Trio, also working with students who are leaders on campuses. And I've been interviewing these students and capturing their voices. And these are wonderful interviews. It's a wonderful resource that you can use to help direct your students, to support them and guide them. There's a website, there's also a YouTube channel, and I really encourage you to check that out as well. And I'm always here in your corner, happy to answer questions and do whatever I can to be a resource. I'm just so grateful to have the opportunity to be here with you and to be a part of such an amazing group of individuals. So with that, I'm happy to open it to questions and clarify anything if I spoke too quickly. I spoke pretty fast.
Thank you, Harlan. We're bringing back in Ted Fiske and Ethan Sawyer here. So we've got some time here at the end for Q&A for our whole group of folks. So feel free to drop your questions again into the Q&A if you can. So let me start with a question that has a question, and any one of you can jump in on this one. It has nothing to do with COVID, so we're gonna ask some of those today. And it's very simple. How can you determine if a school is strong in a particular area of study? For example, science to prepare for pre-med. So big, broad question. I think we have a lot of parents on the call today as well. Is, you know, how do you ferret through what schools you might want to target for particular areas?
Harlan, what about you? What do you think? I'm curious to hear
No,
your thoughts.
I always go to, okay, you're at a high school and you have this rich resource of students who have gone through this process before. And they've gone through it for several years. And there are students who are really strong in science. So looking at the students who are strong in science and talking to the counselors who have helped those students, also reaching out to those students directly. One of the questions that I really encourage students to ask, and I like to go to the source. So you find that student who's gone through that process, and then you actually reach out to that student, and students are really accessible. And you say to them, how did you choose the school, and what are 3 other schools you were interested in? Because instantly you're going to get all the knowledge that that person has accumulated while going through that same process. And if you ask a few students who geographically have gone to a few different places, all of a sudden you're going to learn a tremendous amount of information about what type of school it is, what that process was, why they chose that, and why there may be some other schools and options that have programs that maybe aren't as well known, but are also incredibly strong because of their alumni network or because of their accessibility. Or maybe it's a program where people will then go to a graduate program. So I'm always like people, places, patience. And that's a hard thing for some students to do. I'll just finish one more piece. I'll say, listen, if you can't talk to that student, then a lot of times they don't want it badly enough, or maybe they need help at getting access to that student. But I think there's so many rich resources, and especially during COVID, students have more time, especially college students, they have more time to help offer support and answers.
Yeah, I want to just a shout out to what's happening in the chat box. Rugs recommendations, and if you're a counselor, you've been doing this, you know about rugs. RUGGS for those of you who aren't familiar. And then I want to just give another shout out. For me, it's like, who are the counselors and folks who've been thinking about this a lot, and who are those students of colleges? And a lot of those folks were consulted for Steve Antonoff's book, The College Finder, which again, if you go to College Express, you'll find a lot of those schools, and you can search by major. So you might type in, for example, engineering, great engineering schools, College Express, and there will be a list of a bunch of those. And then I find that helps whittle it down from 1,600 or whatever to, 30 or 15, and then students go deep dive into those schools that are kind of in their range based on their application and based on their profile.
So a question here from one of our attendees, long question here, I'll read it quickly. It says, many students, especially freshmen, are finding it difficult to be on campus due to limited in-person class sessions, not having in-person clubs and activities, and RAs that are checking in on them. And I'm hearing that many are heading home to learn remotely as the college experience is lacking this year. Do you think this will translate into more students withdrawing and returning when things get back to some form of normal, or is there some kind of long-term effect to any of this?
You want to venture a guess?
I mean, I see that there's so many students who are going through this process, and right now, especially when it comes to October and November, this is when homesickness peaks. This is when students are feeling the most discomfort, and the answer is typically stay on campus and work through it. It will get better. The first semester is always difficult, or first quarter. But the difference this year is that when students say, I want to leave, I want to come home, there is this reaction from family and from the people who are in students' corner, and they say, okay. I think that's really the big difference, is they say, okay, rather than, work through that. So I think that we're going to see a lot of students, from the students I've been talking to, in terms of the isolation, in terms of the loneliness. And the other thing is, I don't think that's a bad thing. A student who wants to come home during this environment and this time, who hasn't been able to find their people and places, I think there's nothing wrong with them taking that time and going to a place where they can be nurtured, where they can feel safe, where they can feel secure, and then do a reset. I find that any student who I've met who has had a gap year tends to be a stronger, more resilient, more focused student that sophomore year or that freshman year after that break. We're talking traditional students. So I think that it will end up being something we see a lot of. And again, I don't have data to support this other than the anecdotal data I have from working with campus leaders and doing in events, and seeing that there's just a tremendous amount of loneliness in students who are struggling. I mean, will that carry over? I think we'll see, as long as the pandemic is there. It's going to be an issue that students have to manage. I don't want to monopolize this, but there are so many clubs and activities and organizations that are available on campus where students who want to participate can, and they can also find really creative ways to engage.
You also have a substantial number of students who are simply deferring admissions entirely and saying, we'll come back, and especially at more expensive schools. This is a real temptation. I think I saw one statistic, something like 20% of Harvard freshmen have deferred their admission. So they're still keeping that in their pocket, but we'll come back next year. And that's going to cause some interesting problems with expanded sophomore classes. It's another headache for admissions directors. how many new applicants do we accept if we've got all of these people who have deferred? But yeah, as Harlan said, deferring makes a lot of sense for a lot of students anyway. But now this is a good time to do that. Now, your limitations of what you can do are serious in a COVID environment, but it still makes a lot of sense to say, okay, let's forget about this year. We'll come back and start again next year.
Got it. Yeah, Ethan, if I can direct a question here, we've hit the half hour here. We're gonna go a few more minutes here on our Q&A with all three of our panelists here today. Just FYI, Ethan, for you, this is from Sarah. Quick question. I advise my students applying to highly selective colleges that it requires high levels of energy, nerves of steel, and a willingness to take risks. Do you agree with this advice?
Absolutely. I mean, that sounds like college in some ways too, but I think that those all sound like great qualities. And yeah, and I do want to, I like that the reframe that you're offering, Harlan, of the sort of win or learn. I really think that acknowledging for them that, and you probably do this, Sarah, with your students, that, you know, letting them know that there's so much to life beyond the highly selectives, and there's so much beyond even just getting into college, right? That brings happiness in our lives. So, you know, that just sounds like good advice. Will you read those again, Todd? What were those bullet points? That sounds like good life advice.
They were, oh, hang on, got moved on me. There was nerves of steel.
I got that one. I remember that one. Willingness to take risks.
I believe that was there, yes.
And there was one more. Yeah, that just, you can put that on a poster and just have like a picture of a mountain next to it. And you could market that on Etsy. I forget what they were, but I like that advice. Yes, that's my short answer. High energy. Thank you, Patricia. High energy. Yeah.
Okay, so question for you, Ted. This is from Stuart, and it was talking about we were just talking about the gap years. And Stuart says, how do you think the larger numbers of gap students and other deferrals will impact the acceptances of high school seniors?
I don't think anybody can answer that question. I mean, the colleges are busy trying to make those calculations for themselves, and it's obviously going to differ vary a lot from college to college. But this is a real conundrum. And what do? You have some flexibility in the number of transfer students you can take, but how are you going to balance the size of the freshman and the sophomore classes? It's a real challenge. I don't think anybody's got a good pat answer for that right now.
I mean, my part of me feels like, yes, they will expand because it scales better and folks have gotten more used to the sort of online option, but who knows? And I'd love to, we've got probably a lot of knowledge on this call from our folks who are listening. I'd love to hear if other folks have heard things, through the grapevine.
Yeah, please chat it in. Ted, question for you from Claire. She says the Fiske Guide lists strongest programs for each college. How are these programs determined?
We get the information from questionnaires, and we get questionnaires from the colleges, and we get questionnaires from students at the colleges. And so we look. It's a journalistic effort, and what you're doing in journalism is essentially looking for repetition. So we try to get a sense of what the opinion is of the colleges, what their own strengths are, but also how the students see it.
Okay, question for you here, Harlan. This is from a public high school counselor who says that the first thing that students and parents will freak out about is a failing grade. The messaging very often could be from colleges, generally speaking, is that you must not fail. You must have A's and great scores to fill in this, to attend this fill in the blank school. How do you coach students and parents who have that kind of mindset?
Well, you could start with, looking at some data, look at the CEOs, the top 10 CEOs. And during the college, was it the varsity blues scandal? I would say, 8 of those are not bribe-worthy schools. they're not the ones that are the most selective that everybody's trying to get into. So really recognizing that there are so many different paths. I know somebody mentioned Frank Bruni's book as well, which is a wonderful example of showing that there are many paths to get where you want to go. And this is why I'm a big fan of students asking themselves the question of, when you get to a school, what are you going to do? Where are the places you're going to do the things that you love to do? And not even apply to a school where you haven't identified those places, because it's so key for you to recognize what's going to happen once you're there. When it comes to the most highly selective, I'm a huge fan of students talking to those students who are at their safety schools and recognizing that oftentimes they have more access, more availability, more opportunities to participate in many of the activities and engage in many of the things that are going to create value for them in their education. Most often, it's the graduate school that they're going to go to if they want to pursue an additional degree. So I'm a huge fan of helping people to see that some of our most unbelievable leaders and innovators are oftentimes not the valedictorians. They're the ones who get the most rejected and oftentimes don't find their way till later. So recognizing you are the creator of your dream, and then again, talk to the people you want to be, see the people you want to become, go on LinkedIn and look and see what their paths were. And you can identify that their places are oftentimes not the places that everybody's so worried about getting into. So
One of the things you can make the case is it's much better to be a big fish in a little pond than the opposite. Because if you go to a school where you are among one of the more qualified applicants, then you're going to get the best that school has to offer. When the president's pulling together a group of students to have lunch with a visiting speaker, you're going to be included in that. So your opportunities are going to be for the quality of your experience may be greater in a place like that. And then no company or graduate school wants to take the bottom quarter of graduates of an elite school. So it's, again, you go back to the diversity of options, and there are lots of them out there, and the opportunities to be successful are enormous.
Yeah, I love that example. And I think I see it so frequently where it is of students. I think that's kind of like a secret, almost backdoor way of doing it, of instead of going to the place where it's going to be so difficult and competitive and expensive, if there's someone at a state institution where you're invited to be part of an honors program and you don't have to worry about the costs. If you're at that state institution, you're part of the honors program, then you're going to be really close to the administrators and they're going to invite you and you're going to have an elite experience. And I think a lot of people don't recognize that.
Yeah.
Well, I know we didn't get to all the questions today, but I want to wrap up here by reminding folks that the video recording of this will be made available to people. I believe it's being sent to attendees, and if I'm correct here, it's also being posted to YouTube. Am I correct?
On the YouTube, I read the same.
On the YouTube. And a reminder that everyone here will be receiving a digital copy of Harlan Cohen's new book, Win or Learn. That we at Sourcebooks can handle bulk purchases of books from any of these folks or anybody on our list through our salesperson Lance Vanderhagen. You can just ping us through Sourcebooks and we'll help you out with that. And we have a winner of the Sourcebooks College Prize Pack, which is including all of these books. The winner will also be notified by email, but I will announce the winner here is Sonia Montiel.
Sonia.
Congratulations, Sonia.
Congratulations,
We'll
Sonia.
hit you on. We'll get you on email and get that to you. I want to thank our guests here today. Harlan, Ethan, Ted. We've been working together for all of us many years, and so thrilled to have you be able to spend some time with us today. To our counseling community, we missed you at NACAC this last month. We will hope to be back to normal at some point in the future and see you all again. We were supposed to be in my hometown of Minneapolis, so I missed it especially, but we missed you all, and we're all out here doing the work to try and help you out. So Harlan, Ethan, Ted, thank you for your time today, and thanks to all of our attendees for spending some time with us too.
Thanks.